Hey boys and girls, Chris here. In this short video tutorial, I'm going to go through some of the thought process in making an HDR image, some of the things required to make an HDR image. So what and why? Okay, this stands for high dynamic range, which most of us know. We use it to exceed the brightness range of the capture device. Cameras can capture 5 to 10 stops of brightness, and our eyes can see 14 to 18 stops of brightness. And it's not without your eyes needing to adjust quickly. They're not going to see that range of brightness in a single shot, but they're able to adjust quickly. So with so many files, workflow and management are essential, which you'll find I like to stay in Lightroom for that reason. So you'll see here in the middle image, the reason that we need to stay with bracketing, this becomes a need issue, is because we find that by looking at the histogram that we have black shadows and clipped highlights. So we want to bracket this to capture the entire tonal range and give us the ability to merge them together. So your eye versus the camera. Your eye can see much more than the camera can see in a single capture, as we can see in both of these charts. So why or why not? Does your scene require, or do you desire the effect? So you determine whether the scene requires manual or auto bracketing. Now, auto bracketing would be turning the bracketing options over to your camera, and certain scenarios would mandate this. Others would be a manual bracketing scenario. Refer to your camera manual for auto bracketing settings, because they will differ. Some cameras will allow only certain ranges, but if you have movement is probably the key. The movement and moment aspects of the scene that you're trying to capture will be indicative of what you choose for your bracketing method, whether it's auto or manual bracketing. If the camera is on a tripod, although it's not required, turn off the VR or IS, the vibration reduction or the image stabilization. Turn them off. Set manual focus and set white balance. Ensure the ISO is as low as possible to reduce the introduction of noise. All very important aspects. So the topics we're going to discuss here are the gear, the capture, the merge, deghosting, the map, and the final touches. So the gear. We have the camera, the tripod, which is optional, shutter release, which is also optional. So you see two pictures here. The one on the left of the bridge is a picture that I captured with a shutter release on a tripod. And the picture to the right was handheld, no tripod was being used, no shutter release. And you can see the two distinctly different captures. One communicates a sense of motion, the one on the right, and the one is more a static image with less motion, or very minimal motion involved in the picture at all. So the capture, if it's auto bracket, we want to auto bracket if there is movement, or the moment is, or we desire motion in the picture. Secondly, we can manually bracket. And we want to manual bracket if we wish to monitor histograms and capture the entire tonal range of the image. And we want to bracket using shutter speeds. We don't want to use ISO or your aperture, because it'll vary the noise, enhancing the bad aspects of elevating the noise, and vary the depth of field. So look at your camera manual for auto bracketing needs. More in the capture. This histogram on the left shows just the brightness histogram, not as accurate as showing the individual channels. So the focus should be in manual, and the balance should be white balance should be set. Cable releases and tripods are best suited for this situation, and want to monitor the histogram to ensure the entire tonal range is captured. And we want to look at the individual channels for better accuracy. So with the deghosting aspects, Photomatic has a wonderful deghosting ability because it's selective. You can select certain areas and you can deghost it. Photoshop will automate the process. We'll do some deghosting for you. So certainly you can get rid of some ghosts. in some movement in your pictures, even with Photoshop. But intended to remove movement within the frame. So we're looking at movement within the frame, not the entire frame. We're not trying to minimize camera shake. If you're moving the whole camera and the whole frame is for some reason ghosted. So the merging process: merge your brackets after any deghosting has been handled. So after we've deghosted, we can go ahead and merge our pictures in our application, whether it's in Photoshop or in programs like Photomatix or Nik software or other third-party softwares. Select all of the brackets and merge. Merge the images into a 32-bit file. Your choice is to keep the 32-bit file for reprocessing later, or for possibly bringing back into Lightroom, as I'll show you in the future, or not manage it at all and just go right to tone mapping. This can be done with third-party programs or in Photoshop. So that's the merging part. The mapping part: there are many ways to map your images: tone, compressor, detail, enhancer, exposure, fusion, etc. There's a difference between merging and tone mapping. So merging the file takes all of your information, turns it into a 32-bit file with tons of information. But the mapping takes that 32-bit file and maps it back to 16 or 8-bit, which our monitors can portray, our printers can print, and our software can deal with. So these are some of the tone mappers that are available to us in programs like Photomatix. And finally, we can put final touches. And most of my images, and I would say most of all images, have gone through some phase of Photoshop, especially at the very end, to bring back the depth, to bring back the volume that the process is flattened out. Merging and tone mapping, just for that. Use the application just for what it is best suited for, whether it's merging or mapping or whatever. Again, allowing Photoshop to bring back the depth and interest. This is done with 4 major considerations. The 4 major considerations I have in Photoshop is to clone out and remove unwanted portions, and to create a blank layer in overlay blend mode. And I'll go through this in another movie. This will allow us to paint in and burn and dodge, and create 2 photo filters, adjustment layers, one for warming, one for cooling, and mask those in accordingly, and we'll go through that. And finally, actually a fourth layer, a blank layer in saturation blend mode, and painting in or out saturation. This creates a push-pull effect and allows the image to get more depth. How much is enough? This is entirely dependent on the scene. You want to get it all in there. 1 or 2 stops for the bracket. Well, 1 stop will give you smoother transitions, but 2 stops is more than adequate in most situations. Some of this is limited to the camera, obviously. 1-stop brackets are adequate, but sometimes overkill, as I said before. Marker the brackets start and stops by putting your hand in front of the lens or something in front of the lens to indicate this is the start or stop of a sequence. So when you get this back in post, you know where the start and the stop parts are. Non-use of tripod will result in ghosting. So don't think that you can handhold it perfectly and not get any camera shake or any kind of movement at all. Ask yourself this: how many stops are needed to get all the tones in the range? And even if HDR is not needed, do you want the effect? Are you looking to bring out the mid-tone contrast or the details? This is just an example of shooting RAW versus JPEG, and how important JPEG aspect of shooting can be when it comes to file size and produce images. How quickly your software will be able to run, but it's not coming for free because you get 2 bits of that 8-bit channel is noise, and a single RAW file has much more dynamic range than 3 JPEG files. So keep that in mind when you're processing your images. And finally, where noise lives. This is kind of an unknown fact, I think, for most people, that they don't realize that most of the good information lives in the top half of the histogram, as you'll see right here in this diagram. Over 2,000 tonal range levels are available in the upper fifth of that range, and 1,000 in the next fifth, and 500 in the next, and you see it gets lower and lower, and it gets occupied. The noise floor starts to build as we move towards the left. So we want to move the histogram as far right as possible. So when we're getting our lower part and we're looking at the histogram as we bracket our exposures, we would like to move that histogram over so most of the information falls in the top half of the histogram. Hopefully this whole kind of in a nutshell process has been helpful, and we're going to proceed with a couple more videos to kind of show in more detail these techniques.